Hi, friends. So I'm going to begin talking about Lorna Simpson today, and I'm going to give you a brief background. I want to do this in very much the same way that I'd like you to do it. So this might be a slide for you, um, and it would be your background slide. So Lorna Simpson was born in Brooklyn in 1960. She's African American. She's primarily a photographer, works with text and other materials as well. By working with text and considering how her subjects engage with the viewer in her photograph, Simpson is interested in deconstructing the narrative, a traditional photographic narrative, in order to create a more ambiguous and possibly underrepresented narratives. So she's challenging to some extent um, the expectation of a white narrative of a particular patriarchal narrative where women's voices and black voices have been underrepresented. And she does that in unique ways. So here, let's say this is my piece that I'm talking about. Like, I'm going to try to model this for you, right? We see a really starkly contrasted photograph in black and white with text beneath. The figure is dressed in a very, very simple dress and has an old water pitcher in her left hand and a more contemporary kind of plastic bottle in her right. Both are pouring out water. Her back, I believe it's a woman's back based on her hair, back, arms, and body shape and dress, um, that her back is towards us. The text says, she saw him disappear by the river. They asked her to tell what happened, only to discount her memory. And some things that I would want you to consider are that discounting of her memory, is that a way that, as a black person or a black woman, her witnessing of the world has been discounted throughout time, at least in America? Um, does the work or labor that she's doing, and water is probably the most important things for us to have, is that discounted? And by turning her back and we don't get to see her face, does she become emblematic of many people? All right, so that's an example of what you could do when you're talking about a piece right here. Okay, here's another piece of hers, and um, this is printed on felt. Okay, and these are all traditional African American hairstyles over the years, and to some extent because of the color of the wigs, and to some extent um, she's making commentary on hairstyle, on identity, on beauty, on color, and you might so if this was your image, you might pull this out and blow some of them up and give them historical context. But even generally speaking, like I'm doing now, it's valuable to think about perhaps regional considerations. What constitutes beauty? It raises issues in classes where I've taught this with mostly, if not all, African American students, questions around light skin and dark skin, and the perception of beauty within that spectrum are also really interesting conversations. So Lorna Simpson is interested in engaging in that dialogue. Another instance here where we see how a black man's body is put on display and discussed, and there is this kind of whispering narrative, almost the way we saw here in Waterbearer. And there's both a gentleness and a firmness to some of the um, language, and it really, you could argue that she's interested in how a narrative could be read differently than we're used to. Okay? And so let's say I'm asking you to come up with a couple of images and ask questions. So this is an image I'm going to ask you questions about. Okay? And so you would present this on a slide and then create questions for people to respond to. And all of us would do that. What do you think the purpose of the variety of miss words are at the bottom of the installation? And you can see misdescription, misinformation, misidentify, misdiagnose, misfunction, mistranscribe, misremember, misgauge, misconstrue, and mistranslate. You don't have to answer it for us. You shouldn't answer it for us, okay? We are going to do that answering, right, as a class. And also another question I'm throwing in there, how do you interpret the significance of the title, 5-Day Forecast, for this piece? Why title it that? How do you interpret that? Why do you think Lawrence Simpson titled it that way? Okay? Does that make sense? So this would be like what you need to do this week, and you would write this up. You would include some of the images so that I could see them, but for the artists that you've selected, but you'd write up some of your questions and do some of your analysis work, okay, about the pieces. Okay? All right. David Sally, he's part of a group of neo-expressionists. I'm also going to be showing you Julian Schnabel, who is a neo-expressionist. And then we will also look at Barbara Kruger as a way of introducing you into one of your writing assignments for the week, okay? David Sally, okay? Here's an image of his where all of his imagery, all of it, uses multiple images. All of it uses juxtaposed, cartoony images, more traditionally rendered images, different styles, okay? And the body, the form, you can see like this cartoony woman bent over right there in the center of the, like right by where the D is, under Goodbye D. He uses text. He uses source material from art history, from magazines that he collected source material when he worked as an art director for, I think, a pornography magazine. So he collected all this different source material and then juxtaposed it almost into a type of puzzle. When we dislocate an image from its source, we create the potential for a different meaning, right? He's flipping rotating the view of things. If we take a look at this piece that has vertical elements on both halves, but on the right side, it feels like the room itself is twisted, right? He also had a background as a dancer, and to some extent how the body reacts with form as just body and space, being able to appear at different places in time is something that might be interesting to him. And some of you might choose to do David Sally, so I'm not going to go that deeply into it. But one of the things when we talk about neo-expressionists, we're talking about people who are very interested in bringing meaning back into art. We're interested, to some extent, heroic scale. These are quite large. And in a lot of ways, they sometimes are using mythic or nationalistic themes or erotic themes. And I think David Sally falls into that category. Here's a great example of like a juxtaposition of images. And if in the back of your head you're thinking, this looks a little familiar, right? I would hope that you're connecting this to some of what the collage aspect of this to James Rosenquist. We looked at the painting for the American Negro, and a lot of Rosenquist's work was very collage-like, and you could see that may have influenced David Sally here, okay, 30 years later. Pretty cool, right? Julian Schnabel, this is his house. It's pretty elaborate. And I just showed that because I walk by it regularly. He was famous for plate paintings. This was 1978, The Patients and the Doctors. And he, you can see that it's very kind of expressive, gigantic, raw. Think of rawness with some of these artists. Here's another one, the sea. This one's a little more poetic, right? It's called Jerusalem, and it's one of his gate paintings in 1988. Think of the scale, 16 feet by 16 feet. It's definitely taller than the room you're probably sitting in. It may even be wider, depending on how big your room is. So that's a pretty big painting. And it's also got wood on it. Here's another one, Palestine. Jerusalem, Palestine. Okay? Same size. Here's a piece you may have heard of, Basquiat. Julian Schnabel and Basquiat were friends, and this was a piece that he made commemorating Basquiat's death on August 12th. And I believe it was 1988. Here's a little self-portrait of his, more recent. Here's a portrait he did of Andy Warhol, and you can see it's quite raw, and it's using figurative work, but it's playing with representation and a very expressive gesture. And the scale is quite large too. It's about 8 by 10 feet. And I'll introduce Barbara Kruger here. She's very famous for this. She worked with kind of almost as an advertiser for making art. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to get a lot into it right now in the lesson. I'm just going to show you a couple of images, but then for your assignment, when you look on the website, the Power Learning website, where you're going to see all your assignments, I will have the many images there and more direct instructions. You're basically going to analyze a work of art. You're going to choose one of her pieces. You don't have to do them all. Okay, just choose one. I'll just go through and show you a couple of images. This was an installation of hers. Okay, you'd walk into that. You could walk on that. Okay, and we'll leave it at that. I'll keep this short. You have a bunch of things to look at this week, and that should help you, one, especially with the Lorna Simpson, to see how you're going to frame your research this week and do your drafts in writing, and also give you a little foregrounding into kind of neo-expressionism, and also, get a sense of what might be happening with Barbara Kruger. I'll answer a lot of questions on Wednesday night if you have them, and have a great week.